no civil service, no extensive educational system, a history with the British and the Russians and everybody else who has gone there in the past. So are we going forward talking about containment and black ops, and can we do it there, or do we just acknowledge right up front it's another failed state, it's another small epidemic?
I don't know if it would be a failed state. I mean, let's focus on the moral question.
Okay.
I mean, in one sense, I don't think the moral question is an important question, because my view is that, and I could be entirely wrong, I've never sat with the other 4 people in the Oval Office trying to decide, you know, where we're going to invade or bomb or leave or what. But my guess is that moral considerations seldom figure as anything other than an afterthought among people making decisions about international politics. Maybe I'm wrong. That's my belief. But let's pretend that moral considerations either do or should figure in an important way. Then it seems to me there's a couple of big questions that come up. Why does Afghanistan go to the front of the line? I mean, if we look around the world to places where we may owe some moral debt to the people who live there, does Afghanistan go to the front of the line simply because it happens to be on the front page of the New York Times today?
Well,
I would argue.
I think the parry to that
I would argue that if indeed moral considerations figured importantly in the making of American foreign policy, that there are people to whom our debt is greater than our debt to the Afghans. And I would begin by saying that if we want to go fix a country because there's a moral responsibility, we should go fix Mexico. I mean, Mexico is a place that is badly governed, riddled with corruption, underdeveloped, has very weak internal structures, and at the present moment is riddled with violence as a result of drug wars that are stoked by our demand for drugs and our liberal gun laws that allow them to go killing each other. So if moral stuff matters, then god dang it, let's go down there and spend a few $100 billion trying to fix Mexico. Now you and I know nobody is going to vote more than $10 to try to go fix Mexico. Point number 2 is, with regard to moral considerations driving policy, who pays? Who pays? Let me be really blunt about it. Whose kid goes to Afghanistan in order to make good on our collective responsibility to the Afghan people? And I have to say, for most of us, it's not our kid. Who pays financially? I mean, if President Obama comes and says to all us old folks, I'm on the verge of being eligible for Medicare, I guess. What's Medicare, like 64 or something? President Obama says, in order to make good on our moral obligation to Afghanistan, Professor Bacevich, we're going to decrement the amount of Medicare that you can claim by $500 a year. You and all the rest of you baby boomers. What would the baby boomers say? Hell no. You ain't taking my Medicare and giving it to a bunch of Afghans. So, frankly, between you and me, I wish that Americans were willing to seriously consider the moral dimension of U.S. policy. But frankly, I think it is beyond any expectation that we will ever do that. That's a very cynical view on my part, but that's one I'm pretty much committed to.
Thank you. Dave Holbrook, could you help me envision what your policy would look like, or your posse would look like? You know, command structure, legal basis, how do you deal with sovereignty?
Way out of my competence to describe the legal basis, that's for sure. But I mean, my going-in assumption would be that with certain exceptions, Iran would be an exception. With certain exceptions, the vast majority of nation states have a common interest in ensuring that force is monopolized by national governments. In other words, almost all of us are opposed to the idea of these non-state actors being able to sort of roam around the world and perpetrate violence. And my argument would be that that common interest provides the basis for some amount of collaboration and cooperation between the CIA and MI6 and the Mossad and whatever, and the ISI and so on. Now, does that mean that the Mossad and the ISI are going to, have an intimate partnership? I don't think so. I mean, I can't describe a chain of command. I can't give you a structure for how this thing is going would work. It seems to me that common interest in wanting to monopolize force provides the basis for at least some amount of useful cooperation. Although then you got the outliers. And you got the outliers like Iran that doesn't share that view and that therefore supports Hamas and Hezbollah. I don't mean to sort of wave that away. That's a problem.
My name's Hannah Michel, and I have a quick question. When I listened to your talk, I kept thinking about an interview I listened to with Billy Harrison. And I'm not sure if you espoused the views of Howard Zinn, but he said something along the lines of, we do not only have to pull out of Afghanistan, we have to pull out or change the way we think about it, change the mindset that brought us into Afghanistan. What I got out of your talk was that the discourse, the narrative that sells war matters a lot, and that the problems we are facing in Afghanistan are kind of 30 years old. So my question is, who do you see it capable of changing that narrative, that rhetoric, that sort of frames American foreign policy as military?
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I mean, that quote I gave you from Rumsfeld, I think is extraordinarily important. We have a choice. Either we need to change the way we live, which is unacceptable. Senior U.S. official making a judgment that changing the way we live is unacceptable. My guess is that judgment is consistent with the will of the people. The great majority of us do not wish to change the way we live. And if indeed we find ourselves locked in these conflicts, then, and if we won't change the way we, if that sort of basket of potential solutions is off limits, anything that relates to changing the way we live, we ain't gonna do that. We have to go into the other basket of changing the way they live. Then it seems to me that fundamental change becomes next to impossible. And that's why I would argue, I tried to give my little imagined scenario of why President Obama did what he did in Afghanistan. I think it is on that point that that decision was immensely important. Were he to make any substantial changes in U.S. national security policy, the Afghanistan was his opportunity. I mean, I don't care much about his domestic agenda. That was his opportunity to clearly signal that he intended to be an agent of real change in the realm of national security. And he chose not to make that decision. He chose to do exactly what Senator McCain would have done had Senator McCain been elected president. Exactly. And I think that he therefore squandered the opportunity, and it ain't coming back again.
Do you think there are any voices of, I'm sorry, do you think there are any people in Washington that are criticizing Obama for that?
Sure. On the left, I give you Dennis Kucinich. On the right, I give you Ron Paul. And they both ran for the presidency last time out. And you saw what happened to them. They both basically got about 1.5% or something like that of the primary vote. More significantly, the way I would interpret their treatment in the media, they were both treated as not serious people. As anti-interventionists, as people with major complaints about U.S. national security policy, they were treated as outliers. And again, I'm repeating myself here, but I see that as evidence of the extent to which, I'm not trying to make it sound like a conspiracy, it's not a conspiracy, but there is a consensus that defines only certain points of view as legitimate. And an anti-interventionist perspective doesn't fall within that consensus. And you could say, well, can't something be done? And I think the answer is, if you look at the course of American history over the past 8 or 9 years, and I would argue the last 30 years in the Middle East, and look at the repeated failures of U.S. foreign policy. If that record of failure is not enough to open up the consensus to unorthodox views, then what the hell has to happen? I'm terribly pessimistic about this, but I do believe my pessimism actually reflects a fairly realistic understanding of the way Washington works with regard to national security policy. They ain't interested in different ideas.
Given that you have made it very clear that you don't believe that morality is going to play a significant role in our strategy in Afghanistan, would you encourage Karzai to continue to talk to the Taliban and cut a deal to buy them off, as you say, as the Sunnis were bought off? Is that a direction that you would say might be worth the effort?
Yes.
Is that for the short term or long term?
For as long as it could be, to the extent that it achieves success, for as long as it could be sustained.
Yeah, but will it be sustained for long term?
Well, I don't know what the long term is. What's the long term?
10, 20 years.
How would you propose to have a 20-year solution to the problem?
I don't have a solution to
That's right. So,
I'm not a policymaker.
Pardon?
I'm not a policymaker.
Nor am I. But it seems to me that unless one wants to have a 20-year U.S. military presence and all that entails, then it probably makes sense to see if there are some Taliban who, like the Sunnis, could be bought off. Not because they're nice people, not because they respect the rights of women. They're probably very nasty people.